We're at the Replimat and engaging in some preamble before the main plot arrives, this one in particular being a chat about Dax and Kira entertaining themselves in a holosuite. The reservation will have to wait as Kira receives a call. Someone from the archives down on Bajoran wants to talk to her about the time she spent in a Cardigan prison, a study of some sort being her reason. Contacting the former inmate seems a good start, though with one minor issue in this case. Kira says she was never there. Curious, then, that the Cardigans, as efficient at keeping records as they are destroying the ones they didn't want you to see, would have her on file as being an inmate for a week. The record is of her, though doesn't say why somebody associated with the resistance cell would be imprisoned by the Cardigans for only a week, rather than, say, shot and buried in an unmarked grave. Kira's confused by the record, and her confusion is watched by a woman on the promenade's upper level, just to make sure we viewers know this is all proper dodgy. Mysteries are Odo's department, so we go for a chat. Despite it being a decade ago, Kira's very sure of where she was at the time, as it was a particularly unpleasant period for her resistance cell. Speaking of cells, the records say she shared one in this prison with 3 other people, so maybe they can tell us something. Imagine her surprise then when the first one she calls recognizes her and says the last he saw of her was when she got dragged from the cell. He could be lying, of course, says Cisco, but Kira doesn't understand the purpose for that or creating false prison records. As the first she heard of this was from Bajoran, she thinks that's the place to solve it. The figure that follows her, the same one watching from before, may have other ideas. Plain Simple Garak is struggling to find customers now that most people are avoiding the station, but at least he still has his lunches with Bashir. Most people under the circumstances might go somewhere else, and when Bashir suggests this, Plain Simple Garak makes nebulous references to space being dangerous and having not left the station for 3 years, save for the trip they took together to Bajoran last year. Bashir sifts the tea leaves of what he's heard to reach the conclusion that the Cardigans would kill him if he left. He's told he has a vivid imagination, which sounds close enough to a denial that most people wouldn't notice it wasn't. Up in Ops, we have a problem. The archivist who called Kira at the start of the show is contacting us. They had an appointment to discuss the prison record Kira is apparently in, only she never turned up and is now unreachable. In fact, nobody seems to know where she is. That's not strictly true, though, as at least 2 people are with her right now. A stranger orders the woman who was following Kira on the station to wake her, and she does. She's told she's safe, though that's a matter of some debate, what with her now looking like a Cardigan. The appearance is all perfectly normal, explains the strange man, as Kira isn't Bajoran. She's a Cardigan spy called Ilyana, one from the Obsidian Order in fact, and he should know, as he trained her. He says she was surgically altered and given the memories of a terrorist called Kira Nerys 10 years ago to infiltrate their cell. It'll take some time to reverse the memory blocks, of course, and it's quite understandable for someone in deep cover for so long to resist reintegration, but she'll come to accept that all of this is true and appreciate her return home. The trainer says she even wrote a letter to herself before going undercover, and he leaves her alone to look it over and adapt to her new reality. Odo's been interviewing people around the site of the old Cardigan prison and found one who says they might have seen Kira walking towards it. Dax did a science and found some wibblies that they're assuming relate to teleportation. Of course, they could also be from a weapon set to kill, but we'll deal with that if tracking down the ships and ground teleporters in range turns up nothing. Back on Cardassia, Kira's testing her cage. A door chime signals the arrival of the trainer Kira was talking to before, and he's brought company. This is Legate Tekeni, and he says he's Kira's dad, though I suppose that should be Ilyana's dad. She's as convinced by this as she has been by the rest and tells him to bollocks, so he leaves her alone some more. Back on the station, Bashir is receiving a visit from Plain Simple Garak. Bashir's not really up for socializing, so it's good news that he's not here for that. He has information about Kira. Back to her we go, and Kira is exploring the house. Cardigan Dad points out the camera he assumes she was looking for and tells her it's turned off. As a person of power, he says they're only on when he wants them to be, which is either a deliberate lie or adorably naive. He's trying to help the transition to Cardigan life, so has instead made Bajoran food for her. Details of her previous life, her previous family here, fall on deaf ears as Kira's still not buying it. She compliments the skill and artistry of the lie, but that's still what it is to her. To the station once more, and plain simple Garak is repeating to Sisko and Odo what he's already shared with Bashir. He's heard through associates that Kira's being held on Cardassia by the Obsidian Order. In this universe, no good deed goes unpunished, so as reward for providing this data, Sisko and Odo are roping him into helping with a rescue attempt. Garak's exiled from Cardassia, of course, or he'd already be there, and we know he pissed off some very important people. This station is the only place where those important people tolerate his continued existence, partly from spite and partly on the off chance that he could prove useful. Sisko threatening to remove him based on the complaints of certain Bajoran politicians is serious business then. Who knows, maybe the complaints are even real. Plain simple Garak has little choice but to agree, though he's very clear that he'll betray them in a heartbeat if he thinks it'll improve his own survival odds. The Obsidian Order may have patience, but everything has its limits. The trainer is back and complaining, loudly and within earshot of Kira, that the drugs to restore her memory should have worked by now. She has important information to share and needs to start being cooperative. That sounds almost like a threat, and the trainer is reminded by Kira's cardigan dad how unwise the usual extraction methods would be. The trainer responds that such fears are entirely unnecessary, but doesn't put too much effort into making his reassurance sound particularly reassuring. A slow fade tells us they've been going at it for a while, and the trainer is getting nowhere. Kira's enjoying herself, though, by feeding him whatever bullshit comes into her head. The lack of progress prompts a change of tactics, and the trainer has something teleported into the room. If the aim was to wipe the smile off Kira's face, then it succeeds. Twice, in fact, as she's not smiling on either of them. Kira has multiple explanations for how this could be, which saves me the trouble of thinking them up. She has rather fewer explanations for how the trainer could know about a memory she told nobody, and he says he knows it because it was implanted after being extracted from the original. I'd probably have pointed out that extraction could equally have occurred a few days back, but I'll admit she does have a lot on her mind. The trainer explains he has no reason to go through all of this when he could just extract whatever information he wanted, an argument that might have carried more water if he hadn't literally just told her there were things he couldn't extract from the original. Luckily for him, she doesn't notice the inconsistency, and he urges her to review the statement he says she made a decade back for the answers to all her doubts. She's still not convinced and thinks legging it is the better option. Bypassing the force field on the window works, but also trips an alarm, at least that's what Cardigan Dad says. He makes no threats and only tells her that she'd be detained by the Obsidian Order before she made any real progress. He leaves the ultimate decision on whether to flee up to her, and only asks that she review the recording he says she made to herself before choosing. The video itself is exactly what you'd expect, an idealist reluctantly doing what's right to protect her people despite the fears of her parents. It's the sort of thing you might hear from, say, a resistance fighter. Sisko and company are on the way, having done a science to the Defiant to make it register as a freighter to anybody who doesn't get too close. Unfortunately, getting too close is precisely what the two ships on their way over to say hi want to do, and no amount of fake holographic phone calls are convincing them otherwise. Plain simple Garak takes the direct approach instead, and with the help of a security code that he either knew or obtained before leaving DS9, convinces the ships that not turning around right now and pretending they were never here would go very badly for them indeed. I suppose the main benefit of a military with so many secrets is that everybody is conditioned to respond with self-preservation at anything a bit suspect, and the ships decide to bugger off. Down on Cardassia, Kira's not doing so well with the current round of questions. She's either unsure of herself or under the influence of something, and the trainer is getting shouty. That's enough for Cardigan Dad to intervene and tell him to piss off, a decision that means the next round of questions will involve Kira being taken somewhere else. It's all a bit much, and Kira throws a wobbly. Cardigan Dad tells her a visit to the Obsidian Order headquarters rarely ends well. Then he surprises her by saying he has to get her off Cardassia, regardless of the personal cost. It's a little later and preparations have been made. Cardigan Dad gives Kira a bracelet from Cardigan Mum, who it's implied is dead, to remember her by. A friend of Cardigan Dad arrives and we're told he can get Kira away without anybody knowing. Sounds unlikely, but Cardigan Dad and this friend are part of a group who thinks things on Cardassia are a little too favourable for the military and the Obsidian Order, perhaps part of the same group we heard about last season. For somebody so high up in the military as Cardigan Dad to feel this way is rare, and that sets off some alarms for Kira. Nothing about her kidnap really makes sense. Any information she can provide on station personnel or ships are things they either already know or could have extracted. This whole deception doesn't make any sense for her. But it does for him. A high-ranking military figure suspected of dissidence, with a daughter sent on an intelligence mission a decade back, who's reunited with her and then forced to endure watching what's happening and what's yet to come? Something like that would prompt anybody with rebel ties to act. The arrival of the trainer and some guards proves her point, though he also compliments Kira on having worked it out by herself. A lackluster attempt at resistance ends with the friend getting murderized, leaving the trainer free to gloat a bit. The gloating ends when he hears plain simple Garak. He and Sisko arrive with weapons pointed, and Sisko lobs a bag behind the trainer. Bit of a weird move, but the script needed a reason for Odo to be behind them, so he could disarm the trainer while Kira does the same to the guards. Time to make ourselves scarce, and Kira thinks bringing Cardigan Dad with them now might be a good idea too. Plain simple Garak is known to the trainer, it seems, which makes sense if he was the golden boy of the Obsidian Order, as he claimed in one of his stories to Bashir. That's likely why the trainer threatens plain simple Garak with far more than letting him rot on a Bajoran station if he doesn't stop what he's doing. Plain simple Garak doesn't really give a shit, likely knowing that he's screwed either way if the Order learns about him being here. It's handy then that the trainer tries to pull a hidden weapon out of his dangus and gives plain simple Garak plausible deniability for killing him. I wonder if the other two guards met with similarly unfortunate fates from those friends plain simple Garak mentioned. We're back on DS9 and confirming that the whole thing was bollocks. Kira is as Bajoran as she ever was, something proven by Bashir doing a science to her DNA. The guy who said he knew her at the prison is nowhere to be found, and they suspect he's also the one who planted the record in the first place. As for Cardigan Dad's real daughter, she actually did go on an undercover mission a decade back and bore a striking resemblance to Kira. They couldn't have used her for the trap, as the memory drugs would have worked, so there'd have been no reason for Cardigan Dad to stick his neck out. Where she is now is another matter, though whether somebody who works for the Obsidian Order would want to associate with a traitor is debatable, and Kira has sufficient tact to not point this out to him. Cardigan Dad warns her not to trust plain simple Garak regardless of his actions here, and she in return tries to hand back the bracelet she was given earlier. He's insistent that she should keep it, so as he makes his journey to political asylum, we'll leave Kira to admire her new jewellery until the next adventure. We like a bit of political intrigue here on the USS Pedant, and even more so when it comes unexpectedly. What begins as a kidnapping plot with questionable logic turns into something else and starts to make sense. An attempt to convert Kira for the data in her head doesn't really work when it could have been removed via other means, or indeed gathered by someone else, but as bait, she's a good choice. Now, I'll be honest here and admit I didn't think so to begin with. On the surface, kidnapping a figure in such a prominent position for the task feels like an unnecessary risk, so why not take somebody else? Kira can't be the only woman of roughly the right age with a passing resemblance, and cosmetic surgery makes the latter of those 2 points largely irrelevant. It all seems so needlessly dangerous when they could have kidnapped shit-shovel Jenny, who works at the local Space Horse stables. Nice enough girl, I'm sure, but probably not someone for whom the Federation or Bajor would risk a diplomatic incident in rescuing. The more I thought about it, though, the more a high-profile target makes a sort of sense. A major in the Bajoran military and a political liaison to one of the Alpha Quadrant's dominant powers? The idea that they'd be a sleeper agent is so far-fetched that it actually manages to wrap around and start becoming believable again. It has to be true because it's just so utterly absurd. There's a more personal aspect to the psychology as well, though. It would tie into the desire for a parent to think their offspring would be a success. Kira's about the best placed an Obsidian Order spy could ever have hoped to achieve, a position linking 2 different governments and the second highest rank on the whole station. Cardigan Dad would want to believe it's true, even if he disapproved of her becoming a spy a decade back. You don't have to agree with the direction they've taken to be proud of your children. The choice of a high-value target makes far more sense when you take those factors into account. The only failure, then, was in underestimating just how much Sisko would take this personally. Maybe there's another discussion to be had there about the differences in culture, that the Cardigan reverence for service and sacrifice made them assume he'd chalk Kira up as a loss, but that would seem to go against their penchant for data gathering. He's given plenty of evidence that he'd do the opposite, so maybe the real failure is misunderstanding just how much of a bastard he is too, and the likelihood that he'd coerce plain simple Garak into a rescue attempt. It's not the first time he's engaged in a bit of the old blackmail either, of course, but he's generally smart enough to limit his audience when he's being a dick. Back to the politics then, and this is the second time now we've heard mention that certain parts of society on Cardassia aren't happy with how things are going. Such a powerful figure as a legate in the Central Command being included gives us a better indication of just how widespread this dissatisfaction has become. Academics and students being revolutionaries is a bit of a trope, and probably one worthy of a far longer conversation than we could have here if we want to discuss the how and why of that particular stereotype, so seeing a military figure in the same boat shows we viewers how serious a business this is. Things are not well on Cardassia, no matter how the military and Obsidian Order try to keep on top of it all. On a final note then, I think this episode is the first mention in DS9 of the Bajoran dish Hasperat. A little reading tells me it's not the first time in Star Trek as a whole, as it first featured in the penultimate TNG episode nearly 6 months before. It's also a different dish from the looks of things, though we could put that down to preparation techniques or cultural differences. I mention it because Hasperat is one of the recipes that I tried making from the Star Trek cookbook that I've now been banging on about for literal years. It's a tortilla covered in cream cheese with sliced red and green peppers. As for the taste, well, honestly, pretty bland. That's a direct contrast to the in-universe spicy reputation it has, though I imagine it makes sense for filming. Having your prop food be as bland and flavourless as possible minimises how many people will have issues with it. Perhaps that's yet another example, then, of the balance people behind the scenes of these shows need to strike. Making it look interesting is all well and good, but you still have to consider the people who need to act with it. End of episode.
What do you mean you don't remember?
I had a lot on my mind.
You've got to have some sort of information on them, contact details and shite. How else were we supposed to get paid?
Look, I'm a starship computer stuck into a dog's head, from a society that no longer has need of money. Being a dick to me because I don't have a solid grasp of how jobs work seems a little unreasonable given the circumstances.
Bloody hell. All this faff and you don't have a single way of tracking down who gave us job. Not even a name.
Well, he said his name was Mr. Morden, but I think he was just ripping that off from Babylon 5.
Yeah, there were a lot of that went on round here. Allegedly. Legal disclaimer, woof.